And we're going to limit our talks to 2 minutes. You can go over a little bit. I'll do that at that point.
Thank you. Chair Bradley, Vice Chair Bergman, Commissioners, thank you. Thank you for your service. And this is the first time, and I've gone to maybe all of them, all these, you know, and we're getting to the meat of this. And I just wanted to say thank you. The remodeling, the second story massing. This is all about second story massing. And I appreciate the hard work that's been put into these options. A lot of numbers. God only knows. It sort of rattles my mind trying to work through it this fast. And fuel for thought on that. It's complex. But simplifying this, I think the third option, to me, that's where I'm going on it, but with one exception. I think we need to push down and enlarge what can be on the first floor. Reduce what's potentially on the second floor by setting a floor area ratio more in line to 50% and then maintaining the existing lot area coverage. And the rest of the details, I think, are great discussion. More discussion might be needed for that because really the devil is in the details. But having these simple set standards will set guidelines. Simple. Not getting into RDRC review without having more teeth to them. They were very nice to me. They approved what I have to live next door to, which has robbed my light and privacy. And they apologized to me, but they couldn't do anything for me. It's just clear and simple as that. So I just want to say thank you. We're going in the right direction, and I really appreciate it. And just keep pushing on those same comments because I think that's what you really have to have answers for. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Bill. Next, David Crabb.
Chair Bradley and members of the commission. I'm Dave Crabb. I'm an architect. And I sent you a letter. I sent it late, so you may not have had a chance to read it. It would have my letterhead on it. I don't know if you guys had a chance to read it, but I will read it off a little bit so that the audience hears what it's all about. A lot of the things you talked about are actually in my thinking. One thing, I agree that the option 3 is the approach to take. I would put the maximum FAR at 0.53 because I would exclude San Carlos in that average that they did, which I think the folks over there agree with. And then I would delete the lot coverage requirement and just put the FAR in. That would encourage more one-story proposals. Just keep it within the setbacks. And then your second stories can go up. But it doesn't limit you to do a full two-story building if you want to, a small building on the whole site. So if you got, let's say, just 0.5 FAR for a 5,000 square foot lot, it's 2,500 square foot of building. You could put 1,200 square feet on the first floor, 1,200 on the second floor, or you can put 2,000 on the first floor and 1 bedroom or 2 bedrooms on the second floor. Gives you more flexibility. I maintain the existing setback requirements, but I would include the daylight plane. And the reason I do that is because you've seen the diagrams and the comment about that 30% that comes over to the 5 feet. It's also a problem with the wings concept, which I think the folks that are concerned about this are concerned about the fact you can do a wing within 5 feet that's 2-story high. So if you have the daylight plane, that eliminates that possibility. So I would do that. I like the increasing the rear setbacks to whatever is comfortable. And I like the concepts they have about relocating the garage, rethinking the garage, either putting it in the back or making it 1 car covered and 1 car open, or 2 cars covered in a tandem type of situation. All of that makes sense. 1 car covered makes a lot of sense if you're going to include it in the FAR, because then it gives you more space to do your housing, your living space. I also had one other thought is if we did an FAR on the site, and let's say that we say that includes the house and the garage. How about if we say you can do as many covered porches as you want on the site as long as they meet the setback requirements, and not include it in the FAR? We like porches. We want to see porches. Put porches on the front. Put porches on the back. Right now, they are included in the FAR, and that kind of takes away your living space, and I think that's not a good thing. So that's my basic letter. I do have a question. I don't think it's brought up yet, and I just happen to think about myself. How does this all apply to second units, ADUs? I don't know, like we talked about, well, garages, if you have two-car garage, separate two-car garage, it's ideal to put an ABU, a second unit on the second floor. Well, except when your garage is 5 feet from the rear setback lines, that's not what we're looking for. And so I think you ought to start considering how ADUs come into this situation. And if you're thinking of trying to encourage extra units or additional units, does that mean that you would increase the FAR for those additional units to make that work? We want more additional units, actually, quite frankly. Little 600 square foot granny units or whatever in a house. So that's that. But I think the big thing, I heard contradictions in the discussion, especially that discussion about the daylight plane and the fact that 1/3 comes through and they show the diagram of it throwing shadows. Then they forgot to mention that their wing concept does the same damn thing. That wing can be anywhere and it can be within 5 feet. It's the same as your situation you have now. So that wing thing doesn't really help you out much. And I feel there's a lot of flexibility if you just keep the FAR in there, and some of these other comments I have. Hope you can get a chance to look at my letter if you haven't already. And as an architect, I think I can work within that. I've worked within the old plan situation, and I thought come up with a pretty nice little house. And so that's my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Next, we have Christian Bishia. And Brent, too, yes.
So let's see, we do have some slides. I think those are being brought up.
And while we're doing that, I think we can go ahead and, for those of you who've heard us speak at past meetings, Good Growth San Carlos, we're a San Carlos citizens-based group that's been, oh, sorry. Speak closer into the mic. Citizens-based group here in San Carlos. We're, the last couple of years, been pretty passionate about the issue of home sizes here. And so in looking at the latest proposal from the city, if you want to go ahead and click through, we got a couple of upfront slides. I think we can probably just, thank you. So the problem that we're trying to solve, as we've referenced before, is really the impact in terms of home sizes on neighbors' privacy, light, and air. So not just the cityscape view or the street view as we've referenced it before, but also the neighbor's view, right? And then, of course, as well as keeping the character and coherence of the city of good living. So the options that have been discussed tonight, which there are 3 of them that are currently being proposed, we want to walk through and talk about our analysis and point of view as it relates to each of these. They've been covered, so I won't enumerate them again. But I think the overall question is, how do we decide in terms of the effectiveness of a given solution? And the problem that we're trying to solve in terms of oversized homes on the impact on neighbors specifically. In terms of next door. And so I think, really there's a few tenets that we should consider, and that includes clarity and usability in terms of how easy it is to apply the standards, how easy can owners determine potentially what they can and can't build. So that's been referenced before by some of the architects in past meetings. When they have a new client who comes in, they'd really like, a back of the napkin type of view pretty quickly in terms of what they can and can't build without having to go through a lot of process and incur cost along the way. And then lastly, we've heard a lot of the folks who have been before the RDRC in the past in terms of having objective standards, because the neighborhood compatibility guidelines that are set out today have left some ambiguity, whereas like Bill Harcola mentioned earlier, where the RDRC said, we're sorry, but we just can't do anything to help you, right? So we do think objective standards as it relates to whatever is ultimately decided on is important in terms of providing the tools for the RDRC and for the planning staff to be able to utilize. Christian, you want to talk a little bit about our analysis?
So if we accept the notion that looking at whether or not the standards solve the problem, so that's the effectiveness, and secondly, are they really usable by professionals, by all stakeholders in the process, this is a really netted out view of pros and cons. We just haven't had the time, both because the packet just came out Thursday night and we don't have, it's holiday weekend and don't have a lot of time to analyze, and secondly, we're asked to take 2 minutes to comment on something which clearly is complex, and we've heard from the city for the past hour and a half on. So long story short, if you look at the current shack, it allows FARs actually up to 78%. So do we think that solves the problem? No. Of house size and the impact on neighbors. Usability, they're complex to understand, and a lot of people have raised those issues. The sliding scale also allows very large homes, up to 70%, which again we feel like is way out of line with our estimation of the median FAR in comparable cities is 47 to 56%. So well above it. And it's complex. We've got 3 levels, and you're asking us to rely on a review process that historically has not had teeth. So I'd feel very nervous about saying we're going to use review to make sure bad things don't happen. Thirdly, FAR and lot area coverage allows up to 59. This is, in our view, because it's the simplest and it gets closest to actually real reductions. We think this is the best option, but we also believe that the FAR limit should be 50%. I take real issue with many of the numbers the city has put up. I feel like they're misleading. In this case, if you calculate the median FAR and you exclude San Carlos from the data, we know that San Carlos has a FAR about twice as large as most other cities on the peninsula. If you exclude San Carlos from the data, the median you get is 47 to 56%. You only come up with, I don't know why it's backward and says 59 and then 53, but you only get up to 53 and 59% as a median if you include San Carlos. And including San Carlos in a data set against which you're comparing San Carlos makes no sense whatsoever. The other thing I'd point out is the median, average, and FAR numbers up there all also include San Carlos. So I think, to me this feels like misleading with statistics. To sanity check what a 70 to 78 or even a 60% FAR looks like, this is a house that is one of the key players in triggering this whole initiative, why people got up in arms about large homes in San Carlos. On the left is what used to be there. On the right is what is there now. 3,356 square feet on a 5,400 square foot lot. This was in my neighborhood, and it was 2.9 times as dense as every other home in the neighborhood in terms of the FAR ratio. It had minimum setbacks on all sides, and what you're looking at there is 62% FAR. So I look at that and I think, a 59% FAR, I think, is not solving the problem. So we think we're supporting a simple approach, 50-50. We think FAR and lot area coverage, potentially with daylight plane too, but those 2 essential elements. If there were a 50% limit on the FAR, and then why not maintain lot area coverage at 50%? It gives people the flexibility to build what they want on the ground floor, and we know that 2-story homes are the major issue. And it's also, it should say, the least impact on neighbors and less expensive to build. I think that's the main things. I guess I want to close with, I continue to chafe a little bit in my seat as I hear Shack recommended this, Shack recommended that. Because again, I'd like to advise people, it was a single family home advisory committee. We made no decisions. We were presented with the form-based option as pretty much the only option to consider, and we're asked to say whether we liked the elements that went into it. So it wasn't as if we began this and said, well, what are the different ways we can solve these problems? We could use a FAR, we could use form-based, we could use something else. So I think these are, and if this is the SHAC's recommendation, where is the SHAC in this process? I'm the only member of this body that's been showing up at these meetings. So if it's their recommendations, why aren't they here explaining them? So, and I'd like to lastly debunk this notion of resultant reductions. It's theoretical and not practical. And I picked up this, letter from Michael Campbell at the back. And he says, FAR values, while much reduced, still seem very high, 63 to 78%, especially when compared to other mid-peninsula cities. Because only using setbacks, lot coverage, and house form restrictions, the results yield no practical limits on house sizes. I think the city's own data in the packet on page 4 here says that, let's see, it actually says that 20 out of 95 homes are over 40% lot coverage, which means that 30% of the homes that people have built in the last 10 years would have had to go up to a second story to get the square footage they wanted. So that's one thing. And the secondly, if you look at, how many homes were over 70% FAR, it's 7 out of 95, so 8%. So putting a FAR limit in place that allows 69 to 78% floor area ratio, I think gets us nowhere. It's kind of like saying, we've doubled your taxes one year, and then you come back later and say, oh, we've reduced your 200% taxes by a third. Isn't that nice? It's meaningless. So I just think, God bless the architects that are coming here and speaking up, because it's not just residents, and I think they give some credence to what residents have been saying for 2 years now. And I really think it's time for the city and the planning staff to listen to the residents and get in line. And we're getting closer. We're very happy to see the notion of a FAR as an option on the table. That was something that it was fighting tooth and nail to get that to even be considered as a possibility. And it's sensible and it's simple. So thank you for your service to the city. Sorry if I get a little worked up, but we've been engaged with this for a long time now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. A couple more. Next is Lucia Sanchez.
Hi. I have to say, compared to last time when I was extremely discouraged, I am really glad to see that there's been some integrating of concerns in these proposals. I'm not great at keeping all these numbers and all these concepts together, but one thing that really did strike me when Stefan talked about, and I think Christian just made reference to it, that this may present a backing down on the size of house that is possible, but not really a backing down on the size of house that thus far has been made. And we're not living with theoretical houses. We're living with real big houses that are already being built. So that's my concern. When I heard that, I started thinking, gosh, even if this is better than what's allowable today, we're not even doing what's allowable today for the most part, and it's terrible. So anyway, that's all that I think. I don't know what the terminology is, whether it's FAR or whatever. I think they need to be smaller than what has been recommended thus far. So thank you.
Thank you. Now, Mr. John Stewart.
Members of the commission, thank you for all your hard work on this. I really like option number 3 like everybody else does. It's so simple. It's something that we're familiar with and we know that it works. That diagram with the 30% where the portion was close to the 5-foot setback, it was always shown in the rear, and I think that's misleading. I think, Shannon, you might have thought it had to be in the rear. Where
Yeah.
that thing could slide up and down.
Okay.
So I think that part of that is something that the RDRC needs to look at, those kind of issues. And I know you're looking at putting a professional architect on that committee, which I think is a great idea. The ADU over the garage, the state law says you have to allow ADUs over a garage, and if you have the garage 5 feet away from the rear, and I think it's 3 feet away from the side, that's going to be a big issue. We designed one project like that. It never got built, but the daylight plane, every community has a different way of determining where does that daylight plane start, because a lot of times there's grade changes, and you take the front setback and the back setback, and then you average those two, and that's the beginning of the daylight plane. And it gets very complicated where if you just say push it in 9 feet like you're suggesting, that makes it pretty simple. You don't have to go through a lot of calculations to do that.
Does that severely limit the architectural choices to do that?
Well, it kind of does, because you end up with a flat wall.
Okay.
I think a lot of it is if you ask to show the neighbors' windows and so on, and then we'd show our windows and you don't have a window directly facing into somebody else's window, that would be a really good thing to add. And then the other thing is that we always try to put bathrooms and things like that facing the side and have bedrooms face the front and the back. So you minimize, you have a high window or an obscure glass window or something like that. So the privacy issue kind of goes away. I think additions are still a problem because it's not going to meet any of those main body size, the garage, and a lot of other issues like that. Let's see, solar is going to be a big thing in 2020. Every house in California has to have solar on it. So if the roof is all cut up with these wings and things, it really makes it hard to put solar on. In Redwood City, they don't have any FAR either. They're like San Carlos. So that might have skewed some of the numbers also. But they're going to go to floor area ratio also. So that's going to happen. That's pretty much it. I really appreciate the staff, proposing option number 3, because, I mean, that's a big concession on their part. I know how much work you put into option 1 and option 2, and I really appreciate the ability for you to offer that as an option. So any other questions? Or?
You would remove that 30% off of anywhere other than the front or the back. Would there be?
Maybe you could say not in the last 20 feet or so. Because that's where the conflict is.
Right.
When you have somebody looking into somebody else's backyard. And the other thing is, if you really think of it, I mean, this is 4 feet. If I'm here or I'm there and you have a window, you're still going to be looking into the backyard. So maybe you just try to eliminate the windows, and that's what the architectural review committee does. And you work with the neighbors, I've never had a problem with it. So
I had a question for you. So one issue that gets identified with these FARs is, it's kind of flat, right? So it might be overly restrictive on a small lot,
right,
and too generous on a big lot.
Right.
Have you seen other formulations of FARs, where like maybe smaller lots, it's more generous, larger lots, less so?
One other thing you could consider, I guess, is limit the size of the second floor, which is like Atherton has that. So I forget what the numbers are, but I mean, they have huge setbacks there and no design review, but that could be a consideration also, I guess, to try to push to have more on the first floor. You could say 20% of it could be on the second floor, for instance, or
Just do a percentage.
Just do it as a percentage. But I think somebody else is going to mention that if you have a lot that's 4,000 square feet and you only have a 50% FAR, you're going to end up with a 2,000 square foot house. And practically a one-car garage you think of as being 10 by 20, but that doesn't work because you can't even get the car doors open. So you need to have it 12 and a half or 13 feet wide. And then fires counted to the outside of the walls. So you lose a lot of space in there too. So, and a lot of these diagrams don't show backup space. Typically you need 25 foot of backup plus the garage. So you're going to be like 5 feet plus 20 feet or 21 feet plus 25 foot of backup if you have a wider garage. So most people don't want to have their garage in their rear yard. So I don't know if you have any other questions. Really appreciate all the effort.
Have either of the architects worked in communities that have form-based zoning, and if so, what was your experience?
Nobody else has it on the peninsula. So I guess they have it out in Walnut Creek or in Petaluma or something. But they might be bigger lots. I don't know what they have. I don't know. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, John. Next is Linda Burrows.
Good evening. Thank you all, staff and commissioners, for all the time and effort. As a resident of San Carlos, I'm really very encouraged to see how far we've come in comprehensively looking at maintaining the reality that we are a city of good living as opposed to a city of supersized houses. I believe personally that the 50% FAR is something we need to give serious consideration. I think setbacks on the side of the house have strong value, as well as the front setback and the rear setback. Privacy and lighting are real, and I'm 5'6", and so if it's only 5 feet, you can't even get your ladder to clean the windows if that's all the space you've got between homes. It does seem extremely restrictive in my unprofessional view. I feel that the daylight plane is also a legitimate concern to spin on for a bit. Being in shadow is something that others have spoken on, and my new friend in the back made reference to a friend of hers who had a house supersized on either side, and now her solar panels no longer work because she doesn't get enough sun for them to work. So that is interesting. With regard to garages, I'd never given a lot of thought to garages in the front of the house being the super eyesore, Americans being so in love with their cars and so on. However, a garage being in the back has always concerned me about it being an accessory dwelling unit later on, which I think was made reference to by a couple of other people in terms of, again, privacy and so on. And I don't know what kind of guidelines we have for accessory dwelling units. It's pretty loose right now. I think it's just whatever the state says. I think that as we look at all of this very comprehensively, that might be something to give some strong consideration moving forward. So I just would say the 50-50 sounds good to me as a beginning, but we've gone so far and invested so much time right now that I think we need to really look very comprehensively at what we want restrictions to be going forward and guidelines. I kind of like the idea of the larger the house, the more opportunity for review. That's just me, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Linda. And now another Linda, Ferrara.
Hi. I want to thank you guys too. I'm sorry I missed the first hour. I had another commitment. Been to many of these meetings over the last, I don't know how long, but I just wanted to thank you all for the option 3. That's good progress. I too am in favor of the 50% bar and the option 3. I just wanted to echo some of the other people's comments in that I'm here as just a citizen. I don't have a house construction project underway or in the future planned, and I fortunately don't have one going on next to me. And but I'm extremely concerned about this, and I want to just remind everyone that, at least in my opinion, the city of I just totally lost my whole train of thought. The city of good living, the San Carlos that we all moved here for, to me is not the picture of the big house, was a little house and became the big house. It's not those houses plastered next to each other, which to me is reminiscent of South San Francisco when you drive down 280 and has all of those houses just smashed together like condos with no land in between them. And to me, that is where we were headed with the original plans that were proposed, with the 3-foot setbacks maximum on the sides of the houses. And to me, that is not what the city of good living is, where the house fills up the entire lot from front to back and side to side. To me, it is houses that have yards around them. And, you know, I hear people telling me, well, that's not what the millennials want. Well, if that's not what they want, then let them go to some other city where the houses are all smashed up together, like South San Francisco. San Carlos is historically been where the houses have yards around them and where people can have their kids play in the yards or have a barbecue or whatever, where you can enjoy the outside, where we have decent weather around here. And the part of the enjoyment of owning a home is to be able to go outside and to enjoy your yard as well. And having a 3-foot setback, as the lady Linda just said, even with a 5-foot setback, you still can't do anything with a 5-foot setback. One of the previous architects said, well, you'd put plants in there so that you don't have to see your neighbors. So, well, anybody knows a plant gets 3 feet, 4 feet wide, so then you have no setback at all. So I want, and as far as the garages being in the back of the house, or even a 1-car garage, that's another one of my pet peeves, because then the parking, if it's a 1-car garage, the parking is forced onto the streets. And we heard talking here at one of the meetings about, well, maybe we'll have to get permit parking. Come on. There's already such limited parking, and as soon as all those apartments that get filled up and all the other construction that's going on, there's going to be no parking on city streets. So forcing people to leave their perimeters of their property to park on public streets more than they're already doing is just going to make this place more of a friggin' nightmare than it already is. And I know that you guys referenced the survey that the city took about the parking. And yes, the parking survey turned out rosy because the way the questions were phrased. I got one of those surveys and I filled it out, and I had to sit and think about every single one of those questions. How am I going to answer this question? Because the way they phrased it, I have to put something that sounds really great down there. Does it seem more congested to you on the traffic on the roads? Well, it depends on what time of day you're talking about. If you're talking about the middle of the day, no, it's great. If you're talking about rush hour, no, it absolutely sucks. So, but the questions weren't asked in that manner. The questions were phrased to get a favorable response so that the data could come out smelling great. So, you know, it's those kind of things that drive people like me crazy, because I want to give an honest answer, but you got to shade it the way the questions were shaded. So, you know, what does that have to do with today? Well, it's all about parking on the street. and it's to do with the garages and where you place the garages. And like in one of the proposals, the garage was right back against the fence. And I heard it said that, oh yeah, then you could put the in-law unit on top of it. And oh no, that won't count as square footage. And I could just see this poor person who's been in their house behind that fence, and they've been there for 20 years or whatever, and they built their beautiful backyard, and they have their nice house. And here comes this garage with an in-law unit on the back with windows, and they're all looking down into their yard, and there goes their enjoyment of their yard. They can never go in their backyard again. That's not right. So, you know, when we sit around thinking of these grand ideas for maximizing the new person to come in and get all of their wants and needs met, what about the person who's been there for 20 years? It's not right. You got to think of that stuff. So anyway, that's it for me for today. But I really am happy with the way things are now turning and going, that it seems like we're coming back to a little more logical way of doing it, more in the San Carlos way. And I hope that we keep going in this direction and make the houses more in the old, you know, like what was done before, what was it, 2009, when the planning standards went nuts and allowed these crazy big houses to get built. So thank you very much for your time and for your energy, and I hope that we get a little more into this before we take it to the, you know, done stamp. Thank you.
Thank you. One more I have. If anybody else wants to bring their slip up, you'll be after Peter Hartrell.
Thank you very much to all of you and your hard work. I think just a couple quick points. I think first is the perspective, as I think Christian said and several others, the perspective of our current standards or current rules versus those before 2011 versus those in our neighborhood communities. I think we need to be clear on what is our point of reference as we think about the changes. It was interesting, Al, to hear you, or maybe it was you, Stefan, referred to the 35% reduction. But I think we're in this meeting right now because we realize that our standards right now aren't right for this community. And I think it's worth looking instead at it from the perspective of the neighborhood communities, which is what the tables are trying to do. But we really need to be, rigorous on the statistics we use in that comparison. I think second, I'd just like to say thank you to Stefan, who's put a lot of work into this, and the staff and you all, but also Good Growth San Carlos. I want to have a shout out to the work they've done over the last 2 years and the participants in the SHAC group. This is a lot of human resources have gone into this, and I'm looking forward to getting it wrapped up in a good way. And I feel like tonight is the beginning of seeing that endpoint. What we didn't talk about tonight, and has come up a couple times in some of these previous meetings, is some of the process that goes around whatever standard we come up with. And there's been talk about the distance of review, that if a house is changing, what is the line we draw, 300 feet or 500 feet or whatever, and that's been lost tonight, but I hope it's still in whatever standards come up, that gets expanded. So there's more of an opportunity for the neighbors to know what's happening and be engaged in the process. And then I think getting a professional architect on that review board was another idea. I think that makes sense, and we should not lose sight of those as we move forward. If asked, I would say I prefer number 3. I think number 3, I think the 50% or thereabouts far makes sense. I think encouraging single level homes in some manner it would be nice to see there as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to speak?